and my partner Donald was a national hunt jockey and eventually became a racehorse trainer, and we had a farm in Morningside, we had some property in Bonco, and my partner Donald had a site in Brancho, Campusnethan, which really was purchased for his retirement, Craig. And one day everything in our life changed, and there was all these lorries on Brancho Road and they were tipping rubbish on the site. So I went down to the site, Craig, and here I couldn't believe my eyes. There was about 10 lorries, all Ryan Plant and Doonan, all parked down Brancho Road. When I got down to where Donald's land was, they had it fenced off and there was 2 lorries in tipping. What we didn't know was that advanced construction, before they had come down to the site and had any of their cabins put on it, they'd actually dug a hole and they had buried asbestos in it. It's bad, Craig, because see the local councillor, he was offered £40,000 not to attend court as a witness for Donald. The first time they came up and they set a horse trailer in fire outside our big barn. 3 weeks after that, Craig, they came into our farm. They came in, they poured petrol on them and burnt these horses alive. One horse got out, Craig, with a burning rug in its back, and the rest of the horses were incinerated. And Donald got really, really, really depressed and just basically wanted to end it, Craig. And I think when he had to leave his farm, we had to leave the farm because I was terrified the other animals were going to get burned after the second fire. I think he got so depressed and he just couldn't understand how somebody that had this terrible thing done to him was losing all these assets and getting blamed for things that just were totally wrong. This case is so bad. I have been told by lawyers, you'll not get anybody to help you because of the people that are involved in this case and its judicial vested interest. That one of the judges that sat on the case 9 times is a judge called Lord Malcolm. Lord Malcolm, it turns out to be that's not his name. His name is Colin Campbell. Second in command to Peter Watson from Levy Mcrae was a chap called Ewan Campbell. What we didn't know, Craig, was Ewan Campbell was Lord Malcolm's son.
Hi there, welcome to a special edition of the podcast. And my guest Melanie in this episode has got an outrageous story, which is incredible, sad, inspiring, just a whole load of emotions, and it covers some really bad things that go on in our country, from the judiciary down, how businesses operate, how they totally ignore people's well-being. They don't care about anybody. It's all about the pound, how some lawyers and indeed judges and courts operate in the land, which is certainly not, as you hear this story, in the best interests of the public. So I'd like to introduce Melanie here. Melanie, how are you today?
Craig, thank you for having me on.
And you know, your story, I kind of know your story. We've got to know your story over building a friendship with you over the last lot of months, to be honest with you. And we've been trying to get this podcast done for a while. So thankfully, eventually we're here. So do you want to just start off by telling us what life was like before this happened? You know, your family set up the home, etc. And then we can go into the story and we'll see how that affected everything else.
Yes, Craig, my partner and myself, I was in property. I used to buy land and get planning for it. And my partner, Donald, was a national hunt jockey and eventually became a racehorse trainer. And we had a farm in Morningside. We had some property in Bonco. And my partner, Donald, had a site in Brancho, Campusnethan, which really was purchased for his retirement, Craig. We had a nice lifestyle, racing all the time, worked hard and played hard, Craig, like normal people do. And one day, everything in our life changed, and it's really quite a horrific story. But since I've been through this, Craig, I've actually met a number of people who have had very similar experiences to myself. So the story started, Craig. I had a couple of planning applications in with North Lanarkshire Council, and I had received a call one morning that told me that someone from the planning was looking for me. So I phoned them back. And the next morning, Craig, and basically what had happened, they asked me about the mess that I had on the road with lorries coming in and tipping rubbish. And I said, well, none of our sites are active just now. 2 of them were just going through the planning system. The other site at Branchell had planning permission, but we weren't doing anything on the site. But then the planning came back to me and said it was the Branchell site and that there was all these lorries on Branchell Road and they were tipping rubbish on the site. So I went down to the site, Craig, and here, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was about 10 lorries, all Ryan Plant and Doonan, all parked down Branchell Road. When I got down to where Donald's land was, they had it fenced off and there was 2 lorries in tipping. I mean, I was totally amazed, you know, how this could be happening, but you couldn't actually see the land from Branchell Road. You had actually to drive down the road, drive down the dirt track, and they had this all fenced off like a professional tipping site. So on the site, there was 2 lorries. So I parked my car across the entrance and I went into the site to speak to one of the drivers. And he said that he was employed by Advanced Construction Scotland and that he was tipping this material on the site under a contract from North Lanarkshire Council, which was the demolition of the old Coltness Primary School, where Graham Construction were the main contractor, Advance were a subcontractor to them, and they were dumping all this stuff in Donald's land. So I said to him, well, you've got no right to be here. I says, this land belongs to Mr Nolan. And they said they weren't interested in that. So then a chap came out, a porter cabin they had there, and told me if I didn't move my car, that the D6 that was on site would run over the top of it. At this point, you could see the lorries in Branchell Road. They obviously realised or had been given the nod that something was wrong. So they all started turning and going away. My partner, Donald, got a bit worried about this chap that had threatened to crush the car. So he moved my car and the lorries got out of the site. By this time, the local councillor, John Taggart, had arrived. He had phoned the police and I phoned the police. So the police came, SEPA came, people from North Lanarkshire Council Planning Department came. So these people were caught in sight. They had a D6 on the site, which had the logo Advanced Construction on it. They had a diesel Bowser. They had an electric generator in the site, and they had a porter cabin. So then the police all took statements and asked me if I could provide the details of who actually owned the land, meaning the title deeds. So I said to him, yes, I've got the title deeds in my house. So he asked me if I would go and get them. By the time I came back, the police had been interviewing the guy in the porter cabin and the D6 driver. And I understand, Craig, they were charged.
See, on that, this has never crossed my mind before, and I don't know why, because you've obviously you spent a lot of time explaining this story over a number of months and over a number of conversations, and this question never hit me till just then. This had obviously been in planning for a while, this exercise to get it all fenced off, get all this equipment here and start dumping stuff on your land. But the people that were ultimately responsible for that, how did they know this land was, although it was owned by somebody, but not being actually used?
They actually had put an application into SEPA and they had false dates on it, Craig. and said that the landowner was a Mr Edwards, who was a personal friend of Seamus Shields, who's the owner of Advanced Construction. They put the documentation to SEPA and said that Mr Edwards had employed them to come and raise the levels in the site and do drainage.
So what they'd actually done?
Oh, you falsified the documents.
Yeah, they falsified the documents of ownership, but they've also made up a sort of mock setup where what they were doing was making the land flat, not dumping waste on it. They hadn't went to SEPA to get a licence to dump what turned out to be harmful waste on the site. That's incredible. That's a whole different level of skullduggery right from the onset. I know the story gets really bad and there's a lot of skullduggery later on, but even at the initial planning stage of this, it's been ridiculous. And I don't know why I hadn't thought about this before. So they went to the bother of lying in documents. And this guy that owned the land, did he have any title to the land previously, or was he just a...
No, absolutely not, Craig. But the thing is, they put these false documents into SEPA, and they put the wrong dates on them to say they were going to be starting 3 weeks after, but they were already on site. The reason they'd put the false documents into SEPA was basically if anyone came, they could say, oh, we've applied for a licence from SEPA. But what they intended, Craig, was to have all this material dumped on this site, be on and off site before SEPA actually gave them the approval on it.
And then if they covered the land over and SEPA came, they'd say, well, there's the job we've done. We were employed to level this land, and there you go, the land's level, but unknown to anybody if the plan has succeeded. There was all this which turned out to be contaminated. That's incredible, isn't it? Now, I don't think... I mean, you're a victim here, but that sounds to me that sounds to me as if it could possibly be replicated a number of times over.
Well, I would. I'm quite sure they've done that on numerous occasions. But the thing here is, Craig, they should have had planning permission to be putting something on a site, not just taking it off. And that was explained by one of the planning officers, Fraser Miller, when he appeared at the Court of Session, and when he was being cross-examined by Roddy Dunlop, QC for Advanced Construction. Roddy Dunlop was trying to infer that they didn't need planning to remove the material from the site. And basically, the planning officer was being accused of making up the planning laws as he went along. And Mr. Miller got quite angry and said, excuse me, they should have had planning permission to put the material on the site before they started, and not just planning permission to remove it. And then Dunlop ceased the questioning right away from the North Lanarkshire Council planning officer.
So to take you back to day one, and again, this hadn't crossed my mind as well. I've seen, I'll try and get something to add them to the video, and I've seen photographs of this land from the air on Google Maps. And you're right, you've got this main road, and then you've got a long bit of track before you get there. And what you were saying was, even when you were on the main road, there was a tailback of trucks, because that's why the council had contacted you. So how many trucks were there dumping stuff?
There was about, there was 10 of them on the road, and they were going right up to the school in Branchell Road, Craig. And when Donald and I arrived down at the site, the road was actually swimming with muck. Because obviously the lorries going into this, they're dumping it in the site, they're having to come out, so their tyres and everything are covered in muck. So there was muck. And that's why Councillor Taggart got alerted to it, because he had his constituents phoning up and stating the state of this road. There was cars sliding all over the place, Craig. So that's why Councillor Taggart got involved. But he had known about it 2 days before I was contacted by North Lanarkshire Council, because he had actually been following the lorries. So he was following them to the school, seeing where the stuff was coming from, and then following them back to the Branchell Road site and seeing it getting dumped.
So when you were alerted, sorry to interrupt, when you were alerted to it, Melanie, this wasn't day one then?
No, it wasn't day one. No, they'd been doing that for well over a week.
Do you know, I watched a dramatisation just maybe 2 months ago about the case down in Corby. Have you seen
yes.
it? Yeah. And what you're saying there is, now, nobody knew at that point there was contaminated waste, obviously, at that, in day one. But you're describing,
correct, Craig.
The muck on the road, and that's very similar to what happened at Corby. The stuff was getting transported, and it was getting transported unsafely, so they contaminated everything from where it was taken from to where it was going, and the whole area therefore became contaminated. So it's similar. Thankfully, at there wasn't this wide scale. We'll come on to your own personal issues that you were affected by it, but thankfully, there was. It doesn't sound as if there was any other people out with that were, in the location that were affected by the contamination. But it's quite frightening. So far, you've had the phone call, you've went down, you've seen the excuse me, the carnage on your site. The police are involved, the councillor's involved. The police were asking you about proof of ownership. And so what happens next in the story?
Well, basically what happened then was 2 planning officers arrived at the site, Craig, and they were from North Lanarkshire Council, a guy called Jim Lennon. And he said to me, while the police were taking the details of the people that were there and basically what had happened, and Jim Lennon asked me if I could take a phone call from North Lanarkshire Council's compliance department. So I did, and this girl spoke to me and she said that I had better get the fly tipping stopped in this site immediately, or she was taking me to court. And I explained to her, I said, excuse me for a minute, this has got nothing to do with us. And this muck that's coming onto this site has come from a North Lanarkshire Council contract. And I got the letter on the Monday threatening us, if we didn't get this stopped, they'd be taking us to court, Craig.
Unbelievable. So that's day one. Is that the sort of everything that happened in day one covered?
If I could maybe explain a wee bit about the construction, having had a lifetime in the construction industry, I know a wee bit how sites should be run, Craig. And this site, the North Lanarkshire Council, they were the client, and they had given the contract to Graham Construction, and Advanced Construction were a subcontractor to them. Now, any site now has to have what they call the CDM regulations. That is a book where everything has to be put in, like waste transfer notes, where the material is coming from, where it's going to, and they have to have waste transfer notes. Now, none of this was in the CDM files. We asked North Lanarkshire for them. They said they didn't have a copy, which is nonsense, because when the site was finished, they should have had a fully signed off copy in North Lanarkshire Council's office. They didn't have it. We'd actually to apply to the court for the court to send out a specification of documents so that we could get a look at the CDM file. And when we got the CDM file, it was sent to Health and Safety and our quantity surveyor, Cyril Farley, from Farley Associates. And he did a report for the court, basically, and said it was absolute dereliction of duty from North Lanarkshire Council, Graham Construction, Advanced Construction, and that report was lodged in the Court of Session. They had absolutely not adhered in any fashion to the rules and regulations around CDM. So
the first sort of legal hearings that you had, they were at a local level from memory?
Yes, that's correct.
At Lanark. So what was that case about, and how did that go?
What happened was we tried, because we were beginning to think maybe that Advance had made a mistake and that somehow got involved in putting this stuff on our site. And they asked us to go to a meeting. So we went to a meeting with Advance, and they asked us all different things about the site and did we want to sell it? And we said no. What we were doing was we had 3 phases in the site. We had got planning permission for the first phase for 31 houses, and that we'd be developing that and then developing 2 further stages on the land, which were deemed as brownfield sites. So we had got planning for the first bit, So we had another 2 parts, like a phase 2 and a phase 3. And we weren't selling it. It was for like a retirement package for Donald. So anyway, they promised that they would give us the waste transfer notes, tell us what they had dumped on the site. Anyway, it went on for ages, Craig, and it was just promise after promise after promise, never came up with anything. So we had to get our own chap in to do some trial digs for us so that we could try and establish exactly what they had dumped, Craig. And I mean, it's just amazing, the stuff that was on that site. It is deemed hazardous waste. And the only landfill site that could take that is Avondale landfill site in Grangemouth. And we got a quote from them, and we asked, you know, what would this cost for the landfill tax for this? And it was £1.75 million, Craig. So you can see why they dumped it there.
Yeah, and I've got a wee bit of knowledge of this. For a while in my life, I was a sales director for an industrial cleaning company down in London, and we did deal with a lot of stuff with contamination. So the costs are just, I mean, when I was in that industry for a couple of years, I was shocked when we started dumping, even things like frozen chickens.
Yeah.
You can't just put them in a skip, and you know, the cost involved is absolutely frightening, and it depends on what they have to do with it. And a lot of things, they have to actually put them in metal containers and bury them in the ground. You know, and that's things like frozen chickens. This isn't the stuff that you're dealing with.
Yes.
So the costs, you know, a lot of people think, well, how does it cost £1 million? I kind of think that's cheap, but you can then see the reasons behind the motive for somebody to break the law, because if your costs can be decimated, you know, it might cost them a fraction of that, maybe a couple of £100,000 to do this whole exercise. But and I would imagine that they knew before they touched the stuff what it was needed, and you'll maybe know that if you've seen some of the paperwork.
Craig, North Lanarkshire Council had an environmental study done on the ground where the school was by Mott MacDonald, and it told you about the contamination that was on that site. Yeah. So they knew that the contamination was there.
The people that were getting the contract in there after the subcontract, they would be well aware what they were handling. And I would imagine that the prices quoted would have taken into account the true costs of putting that, because the people with the waste know that, you know, they're in that industry. They wouldn't be as shocked as I would, or anybody watching this video, the costs. So when I would imagine the subcontractors present a quotation that would include charges for disposal of this waste at the correct manner. So then to save £1.3 million, you can see the motive.
Well, it was 1.75 million, and that was only for the estimated what was on the site, Craig. Yeah. But that didn't include lorries coming to take it, and lorries travelling through there. So you had the haulage cost also associated with this, Craig.
Yeah, true. Yeah, because instead of being a couple of miles up the road,
maybe £2.5 million anyway.
Yeah, because you know, they're only going what was a couple of 3 miles up the road from the original site to yours.
That's correct, Craig. And I mean, Grangemouth's quite a fair distance away from.
I would guess in a haulage truck it's probably about an hour away. The amount of trucks you've seen in a snapshot of time,
exactly,
multiply that by, you know, a number of days and weeks to clear the whole site. It's absolutely frightening. So how far along were we from day one up until you finding out that this was actually contaminated waste?
It was
now on
months,
your land?
Craig, because we kept asking them, where's the waste transfer notes? Can you tell us the makeup of the material that's dumped in site? All we got was, it's inert material, which was a lie, Craig, total lie. And later on in the video, Advance went to our MSP, Alec Neil, asked for a private meeting, and they said to Alec that they had made a mistake, that they had lifted the contaminated waste by mistake. They actually admitted that to him at the time. But SEPA couldn't get a copy of the waste transfer notes from them either. And I think SEPA eventually had to go to Graham Construction and get an idea of what actually was being lifted. But by this time, we had got a chap in to do an environmental study. a chap called Alec Boyd, who had a company called NPL. Now, Alec Boyd was working for us. He wrote a report which we gave to John Taggart, the local councillor, and it was to be getting submitted to North Lanarkshire Council. But Advanced Construction were using a company called IKM, and they had falsified their site investigation report. So the report that was put into North Lanarkshire Council was lies. And I have proof of that, Craig, because eventually when it got transferred to the Court of Session, they changed their pleadings to the stuff on the site being contaminated, where all along they were saying it was inert dirt.
Yeah.
Anyway, they asked Alec Neil if Alec Neil could negotiate with us so that we didn't need to go to court and they would get the site cleaned up. So that was fair, Craig. Alec asked us if we would speak to them again, which we did. And we got 3 offers of where they were taking the waste that they had illegally dumped in Branchell 2. One was a school, it was a building site in Broomhouse that was owned by Bellway Homes, a residential building site. Now, you can't take contaminated waste and dump it on a building site. The second one that they asked us that they could take it to was Woodend Washery, which was a former landfill site owned by Dunham Plant, which at the time was in Livingston Court under investigation, and it had had its licence removed 6 years before that. But even the licence it held could not have taken the stuff that was coming off the Branchell site, because that landfill site couldn't take that material. So that was the second illegal site they were taking it to. And the third one was a site in Glasgow called Green Solutions, who were being prosecuted by Glasgow City Council at the time for not dealing with properly with the contaminated waste they had there. Now, the reason we had to be so careful, Craig, is because of a very strange law. And the law is, if I come to your house, Craig, with a lorry and I dump waste in your garden and I walk away, it's not my problem. It's your problem now because you're the title holder. It's the most ridiculous law, but that is the law, Craig. So you're responsible for that.
See, drag you back a little bit in time. When you found out there was contamination on your site, what was it? Oh,
there was asbestos, palladium, all sorts of things. It's all contained in that report, Craig.
What's palladium?
Some kind of, is it palladium and oil mix? I'm not sure. But we had blue asbestos, brown asbestos, and I think it's the white asbestos. But Craig, there's another point here. I'm glad you've brought that up. What we didn't know was that Advanced Construction, before they had come down to the site and had any of their cabins put on it, they'd actually dug a hole and they had buried asbestos in it. And they had gone to the shale bins, which belonged to Donald, and they'd covered this asbestos pit with the shale covering, and they had put their porta cabin on top of that. And it wasn't until the porta cabin went away that we saw this piece of ground that had it didn't look like the rest of the site. So that was dug up, and the asbestos was all buried underneath this porta cabin, and I had pictures of it. So when it went to court for Advanced Construction trying to get permission to take the stuff off the site, the local councillor, John Taggart, asked for a site visit from North Lanarkshire Council's planning department. So what we did was a bus came down with all the councillors on it. We left the asbestos pits open so that they could come and see all the asbestos that was buried. And not one of them got off the bus, Craig.
I'm not surprised.
They didn't come off the bus. And John Taggart went to the planning meeting in the afternoon and said, the report you have in front of you is a falsified report.
Your report?
No, the one that Advance had put in from IKM. That was a falsified report, Craig, and we can back that up. So he tried to let the planning department see the NPL report. He'd copied it and given it to them. And their reply was, we can only deal with what's put in front of us. Now, they were down, they saw the asbestos pits, they didn't come off the bus, but they were quite happy to look at a falsified
piece
report.
of paper. The other problem that you have, and again, I just know this through a limited experience, but if you take contaminated waste and you put it on top of soil, or even cut some soil and try and bury it, even if you come along a bit of time later and remove every bit of that contaminated waste, you've got another problem, and that is contamination leaks. So if you've got a ton of stuff, you need to take more than a ton of stuff away, and you need to keep going until you hit a level where there is zero contamination. So
that's correct,
for every ton that you put in, you might need to remove a ton and a half or a ton and a quarter, or whatever.
You have to keep removing it, Craig, until your soil gets a clean bill of health. And then once that happens, Craig, you then have to import new material to bring it up to the original ground level.
Yeah.
So it's not a straightforward situation.
Yeah. And something else, and this gets to the sort of human side of this issue, as you guys and you and Donal as victims here. You were explaining what was happening with that. There was 3 different stages to this project, but stage 1 had been passed, and that was for 31 dwelling houses.
That's correct.
So now, if that project stopped then, and stage 2 and 3 were never passed, let's just hypothetically say that happened. That the worst case scenario you guys were looking at was a future and a potential retirement with the proceeds of 31 dwelling houses.
Yes.
And if stage 2 and stage 3 never ever passed, that would actually wouldn't be the end of the world, because you've still got at least phase 1 done. Which, without going into your personal business, sorry, what year was this then?
2010, Craig.
Okay, so we're going back 15 years, and the house prices have come up since then. But depending on the price of houses, you've got to imagine it's going to be 6 figures per house.
Well, the valuation, and it wasn't a valuation for us, it was a valuation that our bank had got done on the land. And the valuation was £3 million for the piece of land that they had destroyed, Craig.
Without any buildings on it? Without
any building, because you had planning. Once you get planning, it goes up a lot.
And was your idea to sell it as a project with planning permission, or was your
No, I think we were going to sell some houses and build some, Craig. We're thinking along the terms of self-build plots, where we would put the infrastructure in, maybe sell 15 of the plots to yourself. If you come in and you wanted to build your own house, you buy a plot of ground from us, we put the roads and services in, and you build your own house, Craig, to your spec.
Yeah. So, which is still time, whatever that sum is to sell that. And yes, you've got some costs here. You've got initial cost of the land and the building of the infrastructure. But, you would be looking at quite, and even, not going crazy and, robbing people for the price you were selling it, but giving them fair market value to buy these properties, times that by potentially 31. And that as the story goes, we will get there eventually with the story, that was taken away from you, and it's still the case.
Absolutely.
Because I see your story in sort of 4 phases, in 4 sort of key points. You've got day 1, which we're done. You've then got the initial court case in Lanark. You've then got the follow-up court case at the Court of Sessions in Edinburgh.
It was a court case in Hamilton, Craig.
Hamilton, sorry.
Hamilton Sheriff Court.
And then you've got the horrific thing that happened with the horses.
In the Court of Session, yeah.
Yeah.
When we went to court in Hamilton, the sheriff actually took the view that it was a prima facie case. There was no case to answer. They'd been caught in sight. They were caught by the police. They were caught by SEPA, caught by North Lanarkshire Council. So they were actually caught in the act, and the D6 driver was charged, and the guy in the porter cabin was charged. So the sheriff thought, well, this is dreadful. They've been caught in sight. These people have been trying to negotiate to get this stuff removed, and obviously knew the facts that, they were taking it to 3 other illegal sites. So they gave us an arrestment, Craig. And that arrestment was to the tune of £6.5 million. It was granted by Sheriff Cunningham in Hamilton. So that meant that Advanced Construction couldn't operate, Craig. Everything was frozen for them. They couldn't operate. So what happened next was they changed their lawyers. They changed from Freelands in Wishaw, Paul Santoni, to Levy Mcrae in Glasgow. Peter Watson. I don't know if you know much about Mr. Watson.
I do,
but he's a heavy player.
Yeah, I was
So what
sued
happened was they went to Hamilton. They got a judge who, if you look back the papers and the evidence we've got, this sheriff in Hamilton always seemed to appear when Advanced Construction need anything done. So what they did was they brought a junior counsel, Gavin Walker, through from Edinburgh to persuade this sheriff to send the case up to the Court of Session. What he said was, if we send it up to the Court of Session, this will be finished within 3 months and the case will all be sorted, which was nonsense, Craig. They wanted it up into the Court of Session because they had other plans for Donal Nolan and how to ruin his life.
So basically, in layman's terms, the first judge, or sheriff, sorry, he decided, look, this is a kick in. This is obvious who the guilty party is and who the victims are, and he arranged for an arrestment of assets of £6.5 million, and that basically is so that when we ever get to the point where you've won and they owe you X amount of pounds, the money's there. And there's no problem. So it's as if, you could spend another few months. They could
sell their assets, Craig, and you'd be left with nothing.
Yeah, so that's to protect the victim. Yeah, and that's to protect you, so that when we eventually get to a point where we say, right, the compensation for this is X, the money's there, and there's no problem.
Or the assets were there, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously that would give issue to Advanced, just to operate their business if all their cash was frozen and set aside, cash flow, etc. So that's why they challenged this. And what they were challenging at that point is the arrestment, not the decision. Is that fair?
Yes. When the arrestment went on, there was nothing they could do, Craig. The arrestment was there. It was actually a lady sheriff, Cunningham, that granted the arrestment. And I think she was quite annoyed with the fact that they had done this, they had been caught. It's not as if we had a case to prove, Craig. They'd been caught by numerous people like the police, SEPA, the local councillor and North Lanarkshire Council Planning Department. So they were actually caught on it. So it wasn't a case of, I need to prove that it was Advanced Construction that dumped it. It was all there. So that's why I think she gave us the arrestment to protect Donald.
Seems like the common sense outcome. Now, the justification to move it up to the Court of Session that was argued by Advanced lawyers was purely for timescale, by saying this could be...
Yeah, but that wasn't the reason, Craig.
So at that point, are you concerned at this point? Are you thinking, well, that seems sort of normal and we'll end up in the Court of Session?
Really not having been involved in that kind of litigation or anything to do with that, Craig. No, but we just wondered, we thought with the arrestment, they have to come sort out the problem and that would have been the case finished, Craig. But instead of that, they brought this junior counsel down from Edinburgh who ended up being part of Advance's legal team. Now, I don't think there was any need to bring a junior counsel, but that ended up costing us £4,000 that day.
Yeah, because you'd have to
have
do the
this
same.
removed, have this taken to the Court of Session.
So, see when we get to Hamilton and we do all the court stuff in Hamilton, what time's elapsed since day one? Where are we now?
we tried to negotiate with Advance for almost a year, but we couldn't get anywhere. They wouldn't tell us what they dumped, Craig. So when we eventually went to Hamilton Sheriff Court, I think it was about September 2011. So, I mean, we had spent a lot of time trying to get a resolution.
You're already a year and a bit down the road. Now, see, back in 2010, What sort of timescale were you guys working on with this project in the land? When did you start?
Well, we were
wanting to get that
actually, our quantity surveyor, Cyril Farley, was actually doing a cash flow projection for us to start and put the infrastructure in so that we could start building. We had actually people interested in buying 15 of the self-build plots that were going to be on there, Craig. So we were going back to the bank to say, right, we need money to put the infrastructure, which is basically roads and sewers in, Craig.
Yeah.
So that we can get started, and then we can let you onto site. If you buy a plot, then you can go onto site and start building your house. So it was going to be pretty quick.
Yeah, it was imminent. I mean, it wasn't something 10 years up the line.
No.
The process
it was getting
started.
done simultaneously. But the strange thing was, Craig, being in the building trade, most builders know one another, especially locally. I had never heard of advanced construction, never heard of them in my life. But my quantity surveyor was coming to see me on the Monday, and it was about the infrastructure costs. And I had actually forgot he was coming because I had to go back down to Branchell because we were told to get the site secured so that nobody could be damaged by the stuff that was dumped in the site. And anyway, Cyril Farley came to see me on the Monday and thought I was up at the farm. But when I went up there, Donald said, oh no, we had a problem. Somebody came and dumped all this rubbish on my site, and Melanie's down there. So Cyril came down and he said, I know advanced construction very well. He said, I knew them from years ago. So anyway, he phoned up and he wanted to speak to Seamus Shields, but Seamus Shields wouldn't speak to him on the phone. So he knew their engineer, Lance Gordon. So he spoke to Lance Gordon. He said, what are you doing? Why did you come down and dump all this stuff? And what kind of stuff have you dumped? And couldn't get an answer from them. But just reading between the lines, I don't think Cyril was a great fan of advanced construction. But until that day, Craig, I'd never heard of them before.
I bet you wish you never had.
Yes,
so
exactly.
You've been to Hamilton, everything looks as if it's going your way, the investment's set in, they object to that, they try and get it kicked up. You're thinking, well, that might just be the way things go and we'll still, crack on. But when does there's two other things that are obviously big parts of this story. There's what happens in the Court of Session and what happened to the horses. Okay, so chronologically, what happened first? The horse incident?
It got moved to the Court of Session, and we had got a QC called John Campbell, who I wish I'd never heard of either now. He was our QC. He was to go because they were going in front of the court to get the arrestment lifted. And what they'd basically said was, they couldn't operate. They had 600 men, and these men were all going to be put out of a job, and they needed the arrestment lifted. So their financial director, a guy called Tom Dignall, he produced draft accounts to the Court of Session. And the judge, who was the Honourable, and say Honourable twice, Lord Menzies, a really nice, I would say very honest judge, looked at these draft accounts and questioned Tom Dignall. He said, do you realise we're in a recession? How can you possibly be making that amount of profit within 3 months? He said, I will be looking at this case very carefully. But because of the jobs that they were pleading were at stake because of this arrestment, Lord Menzies lifted the arrestment. So it just got worse and worse and worse from then.
So when did the issue with the horses come in?
Well, we went through the court case. Now, the court case in itself is a saga, Craig. The very first witness that was supposed to be called in Donald's case was the Health Secretary, Alec Neil, who was obviously a cabinet minister at the time. And it was agreed with our senior counsel that Mr Neil would be called because he had a meeting in the afternoon. So as you're aware, Craig, if you're a witness, you're not allowed in to the court until you're called in by the macer. So Alec Neil, myself and the other witnesses that were getting called that day were all sitting outside the court. And the court kicks off about 10 o'clock, I think, Craig. And my partner, Donald, was inside the court. He was sitting there waiting, and Alec Neil coming in to be questioned. Anyway, nothing was happening, nothing. We kept wondering what's going on in the court. They'd actually pulled Donald out from the seats in the court and put him on the witness stand. He was never going to be a witness because Donald doesn't know anything about construction. And they interrogated the man for about 4 hours, Craig. And the reason for this was that I think Dunlop and Campbell had decided they weren't calling Alec Neil. Now, if Alec Neil had gone in front of Lord Woolman and gave his evidence, I'm sure the case would be finished at lunchtime that day. But the case was manipulated.
So if Alec had got to go in and give evidence, and evidently that just never happened for a whole host of reasons.
They'd no intentions of putting him. And I have a tape of John Campbell at a meeting that I went to with the solicitor, Daniel Falls, and he admits he had no intentions of putting Alec Neil in the stand.
This is your lawyer.
This is our senior counsel.
Aye. So what would this evidence have been that Alec would have delivered had he been
Alec
called
would have
that
went
day?
in. Remember, Craig, they're saying it's inert dirt, which means that you can't, that it's not harmful. Inert means it's not harmful. Now, they told Alec Neil at that meeting that they had lifted the contaminated material from the school by mistake. So they admitted to him. So that was going to be Alec's evidence that they had come to him and they admitted that they had put contaminated waste. Now, what is a judge going to think? Is he going to think, oh, excuse me, there's a cabinet minister coming in to tell lies for Donal Nolan? No, I don't think so.
And that was backed up by geological tests anyway. So so what you get proof that it was there. You've got proof that they knew it was there, and you would think it's an open and shut case. But for some bizarre reason, the person who was paid handsomely to carry out things in your best interest decided Alec Neil wasn't to go on that stand.
No. The case would have been finished that day if Alec Neil had been in the stand. And another thing about the situation with Alec Neil, he then got a letter after the meeting with Advanced Construction. Freelands wrote him a letter and basically said to him, don't dare contact our clients ever again. But Alec Neil never contacted these people. Alec Neil wrote back to them and said, excuse me, I did not contact your clients. Your clients came to see me. And that's all in writing, all produced to the court as well.
Yeah, bizarre. So the court case, there was something very odd that happened because the maddest thing about this story, it's actually not the maddest thing, but one of the mad things about this story is the fact that you won a case but lost financially.
Yes.
Because something pretty weird happened.
Yeah, in the court case itself.
Yeah, it was closing. So could you tell us that story about what happened with the lawyer and stuff?
Craig, the list of witnesses, the witnesses actually to get the story into court were never called, the important witnesses. The one of the witnesses was a chap that was the contracts manager for Graham's. What was his name again? It was a contracts manager anyway for Graham's, and he was sent a citation to go to court. And Graham Construction came back and said he wouldn't be going to court. And our Edinburgh agents at the time sent another letter stating that a warrant would be issued for his arrest if he didn't come. Gary Holmes was his name, Craig. So he was supposed to be called and be questioned about why, being the contracts manager, he allowed subcontractors like Advanced Construction to do what they had done, because ultimately they were the main contractor. They were the responsible for the subcontractors that they were employing, Craig. So anyway, He didn't get called by John Campbell. The chap from Rydens who had written a report about the site, what he basically said was that banks were now risk adverse, and the fact that this contaminated waste had been put on the site, even if it was cleaned up, Craig, the site would have no value for a number of years.
Mm-hmm. But when you get to the last day of court, you still won the case.
Yes, which was ridiculous.
But when the judge was deciding how much money you should be compensated by, something really weird happened.
That's correct. Well, just prior to that, our senior counsel, John Campbell, allowed Advanced Construction's expert witnesses to sit in and hear our expert witnesses' testimony. The lawyer, Mr Falls, knew nothing about this, and neither did the Edinburgh agents Drummond Miller. I mean, that's a very strange thing that you do, that you allow someone else's witnesses to sit in court and hear your expert witness testimony.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But when we get to the final day.
The final day, right? If you look at Lord Woolman's opinion on the case, he accuses Donal for removing 3/4 of his case, the 4.1 million, all these professional expenses for the people that were trying to find out what contamination was in the site, and all the legal expenses. Now, why would you be removing that?
Yeah, so just to, for those who maybe got a lesser understanding, basically at this court case, you put together a case to say we need this amount of money to get our problem solved that was they caused by us. And when the judge gets to that point, you are told that Donal had removed some of the claims, and those claims were for a lump of money.
Nobody knew about it, Craig. This was John Campbell that had done this. Nobody knew a thing. Our junior counsel was very much in a state of panic that last day, and I must say that I had great respect for Craig Murray. And I knew there was something wrong on the last day, because Craig Murray was rushing into the court before the court opened, and he had something in his hands. And when a business partner of ours questioned Craig Murray, said it was rebuttals, but it wasn't. It was a note to Lord Woolman removing all these parts of Donald's case. So in a way, I could maybe understand Lord Woolman thinking, what the hell's this man doing? You know, on the last day of the proof, he's removed all these things from his case.
See, before the case started, what was the total amount you were claiming from the court?
Well, there was like 3 different parts. The £4.1 million,
what was the
2.5, that was to remove the contaminated waste, and that was only an approximate sum, because as we've explained, you don't know the extent of the damage till you clear the stuff away and then do further investigations. So there was a 4.1, the 2.5, and of course your legal and your professional expenses.
So there was 3 claims for 3 different amounts. So what was it? What was the first claim for? The second one was for removal. What was the first claim?
Removal. That was for the site value plus the developer's profit.
Right. So your legal team advised the court that you were wanting to withdraw the claim on the expenses and the claim for, what was the other one they pulled back?
Legal expenses. Why would a QC remove his own legal expenses from a case?
From a claim, So that was removed. And what was the other one that was removed? The 2.5 or 4.1?
The £4.1 million part.
So they took away the biggest claim that you've got, took away a very big claim in expenses. So did the judge order them to pay you 2.5 million then?
No, he offered, I think it was 19,000, Craig, he gave Donald to cap the site. I mean, most ridiculous.
So a multi-million-pound claim for a court case, you actually won because they found in your favour. You were given £19,000, which wouldn't even touch the sides of the legal bill that you faced.
And how can you cap a site that has got planning for houses? You can't build houses on a capped site where there's contaminated waste underneath it. I mean, the case stinks, Craig.
So the hammer comes down and that's the case finished. Right.
And then there's falsified papers put into the Court of Session. Sorry, there are falsified papers. In the record, I think it's called the close record. It's all the things that happen in the case. Suddenly, Lord Woolman decides to make me what they call domini litis. Now, the site where the contamination was dumped was in Donald's name only. That was his own site, Craig. It had nothing to do with me whatsoever. But he then decided that they should make me dominus litis because I've got property in Bonkle that's got planning for houses. I own a farm in Morningside. So obviously they don't want the contaminated site that they've wasted of Donald's. So they want to be able to bring me into the equation. So the next thing that happens is there's falsified paperwork put in the close record and backdated. But they're not very clever because they backdate it to before the case even started. So what he's actually saying was that, Craig, you murdered somebody in 2010, but they're actually still alive in 2011. So you have a trial for a murder that was never committed. So I was put in as dominus litis before this case even started.
Incredible. So
yeah.
Why did they need to do this?
So they could take my property, Craig.
But why would they be allowed to take any property? To pay for the legal fees?
Yes.
Right.
For advanced construction legal fees.
What?
Yes, advanced
construction.
Why
did you pay theirs?
Oh, because we lost the case. But we didn't lose the case. We're given 19,000, but we were held responsible for the fees. And there's another strange thing here, Craig. You have to look at, before Lord Woolman got involved in the case, Lord Woolman was involved because of something else that happened very strange in the court. John Campbell, our QC, insisted that Daniel Falls, the solicitor, wrote to Levy Mcrae and mentioned the word capping in a letter to them. And I told Mr. Falls I wanted nothing to do with that whatsoever. So Mr. Falls was coerced into sending this letter to Peter Watson. And what happened, the very next day we were going to court for a hearing and they tried to stop it. Gavin Walker came across with this reply from Levy Mcrae to Mr. Falls, which Mr. Falls had never seen because he was at the court that day, and said there was no need for the proof to go ahead because Donal Nolan had entered into an agreement with Advanced Construction. So it was put down for a debate, and this debate was heard, and it was heard in front of Lord Woolman, and Lord Woolman came out totally 1,000,000% in Donald's favour and said, there's no contract here whatsoever, and Mr. Nolan would need a lifetime's insurance guarantee on that site because of what Advanced Construction had done. Now, the next strange thing here is the bill for that debate was £9,000 and it was never sent to Balfour Manson for payment.
Incredible. So, when did the attack on the stables happen?
The attack in the stables was in 2019, Craig. They'd evicted us out our house. They evicted us out my bungalow, which is in the property as well. They evicted us out, both of them. It went to a trustee called Kenneth Pattullo, who, if you look at his record, Craig, nobody can understand why this man is still practising. The number of sanctions against him and the fact that Lord Hodge did a scathing report on him, reported him to his practitioners, and the man's still practising. Now, some of the good people in bankruptcy have come back to me and explained what happened in our bankruptcy wasn't legal. We had Donald, when they made him bankrupt, they put him, Levy Mcrae had asked it to go to Begbies Traynor and Kenneth Pattullo. But when I got made bankrupt, my trustee was KPMG, and that was fine. I told them everything that they needed to know about the properties, etc. We were still fighting to have this overturned. And the next thing I knew was that this same sheriff who appears every time Advanced Construction wants something done in Hamilton, he changed my, he changed KPMG to Begbies Traynor. And I've got a letter where it was done in a clandestine manner, and you can't do that. That would have to be in front of a court. But this sheriff did it in letter form, and he made Kenneth Pattullo my trustee. This man is horrendous. We have so much evidence against this man and the harm that he has done to other people that have been in bankruptcy. You just need to Google him on the internet. It was so bad that Alec Neil called Mr Dennis of the AIB to the Scottish Parliament and reported about Pattullo. Mr Dennis said that he had absolutely no control over Kenneth Pattullo, but he would do a full investigation into it. Now, that never happened. That never happened, Craig. And basically, how can you have no control over someone if Kenneth Pattullo needed the accountant in bankruptcy to sign him off as my trustee?
Incredible.
I mean, that doesn't make sense, does it?
So how does this all get back to the horses in the stable,
Right,
Melanie?
so we're made bankrupt. So Kenneth Pattullo's going to sell all our assets. This is in 2017. We don't hear anything from him. We get evicted out the house, move into the bungalow, go back to Hamilton Sheriff Court. And I said, look, they've taken my house. My house is worth more than the court fees, which were £200,000. I said, my house is worth 400,000 and they're now trying to take my bungalow as well. And they pled in court to the sheriff, who was really nice. They're all in the same title, she said. And the sheriff said, well, I suggest you go and split the title. He obviously knew there was something seriously wrong with this. But what they wanted to do was get all my assets and just completely finish us off because we dared take Advanced Construction to court. Now, part of this is bad, Craig, because see the local councillor, he was approached and offered money not to go to court as a witness. He was offered £40,000 not to attend court as a witness for Donald.
So what happened at the stables, Melanie? I'm
right, well, what happened was
horrific.
They didn't want to go back to court to get us out the farm, Craig. So what happened was the first time they came up and they set a horse trailer in fire outside our big barn. What they intended to do was burn the horses that were in the big barn. There was 5 horses in there, and they intended they were going to burn them. But at the time when the fire brigade had got there, we just thought, oh, that's just, an arson attack. Didn't think anything much. We just thought it was somebody had come in and maybe tried to steal the trailer and then couldn't steal it and set it on fire. I didn't think there was anything really that sinister, Craig. 3 weeks after that, Craig, they came into our farm, and you would have to know the farm to realise where these stables were, because they were totally hidden. You couldn't see them. 5 wooden stables. They came in, they poured petrol on them and burnt these horses alive. One horse got out, Craig, with a burning rug in its back, and the rest of the horses were incinerated. There's a picture of one halfway over the door trying to get out the stable with its back completely burned off, Craig. It's horrific.
How many horses were lost that night?
4.
Unbelievable. And these horses, was Donal still training at the time, or
No,
these were just for hobby?
they were actually, these belonged to another chap who had a livery from us. They weren't near the racing stables, they were round the back. That's what I'm saying. You would need to have known the layout of the farm, Craig, to know that those stables were there.
See, going back to Donal, we'll talk about why he's not on camera in a minute. But he was a jockey and then became a very successful trainer. I mean, I've sat in the living room that you're recording this from just now, and it's full of paintings of famous victories and horses that were outstanding. So, was he still a race trainer at the time?
Yes, he was. But obviously, Craig, we had to sell the cottages he had to pay the legal fees, because, you know, you just don't have money for that. You've no idea how expensive it is. And I mean, everything seems to be rounded off at £5,000. I paid this senior counsel 4 times £5,000 in cash. Incredible. Which is illegal. We didn't know that, of course. He just kept asking us for cash.
So at the time, back in 2010, Donal was still training.
Yes, he was still training. Yeah.
The financial issues that you were facing, sort of put that to bed.
Yes. Well, we couldn't do it, Craig. We had young horses that we had bred. We had a wee stud, and we'd bred some young horses to run. Craig, we couldn't do it. We just didn't have the money for it.
So that was taken away from you. And then, unfortunately, I've had the privilege of meeting Donal once very quickly for a short time. It was probably last summer, actually. And could you give those who haven't had the privilege of meeting Donal a sort of idea of where he is just now and what his life's like just now? Well,
he's very unwell. He actually got into a terrible state of depression because when Lord Woolman's judgment came out, Lord Woolman's very scathing of Donald, and he's blaming him for pulling all these things out his case, Craig, when he didn't do it. But people were asking, saying, Donald, why did you do that? I mean, it's down in writing from a judge. At the end of the proof, Mr Nolan vastly reduced his claim. So he's putting the onus on Donald as Donald having done it. Nobody knew that had happened. And Donald got really, really, really depressed and just basically wanted to end it, Craig. And I think when he had to leave his farm, we had to leave the farm because I was terrified the other animals were going to get burned after the second fire. I think he got so depressed and he just couldn't understand how somebody that had this terrible thing done to him was losing all his assets and getting blamed for things that just were totally wrong.
So what's his health like now, Melanie?
Oh, his health is terrible, Craig. I mean, I almost lost him at Christmas time.
And he's bedridden, basically, isn't he?
Yes, yeah.
And is that through any physical illnesses? Is it all mental
illnesses? He's now got the Alzheimer's, but the medical people have told me that not to say he would never have got it, Craig, it would probably have came later on, but it's been accelerated by what has happened, by the stress and everything about this court case.
And your lives have been totally ruined. And
totally ruined, Craig.
You know, it's just so bizarre. I mean, it took me probably 2-3 conversations with you to actually get this whole story in my head because there's so many different facets of it. But,
you know, Craig, if you were telling somebody, they'd say, you're off your head, that couldn't possibly have happened. You know, the corruption right through the whole thing. And another point here is, Craig, this case is so bad. I have been told by lawyers, you'll not get anybody to help you because of the people that are involved in this case and its judicial vested interest. Well, what we didn't know, Craig, was that one of the judges that sat on the case 9 times is a judge called Lord Malcolm. Lord Malcolm, it turns out to be, that's not his name. His name is Colin Campbell. Now, second in command to Peter Watson from Levy Mcrae was a chap called Ewan Campbell. Now, I think Peter Watson was a sheriff at the time, a temporary sheriff, who was removed from the bench because of his involvement in the Heather Capital situation, where money got laundered through the accounts of Levy Mcrae. So he was the head of Advance's legal team, and he contracted Ewan Campbell, who was his assistant, to do the day-to-day running of the Advance case. What we didn't know, Craig, was Ewan Campbell was Lord Malcolm's son.
And the same who sat 9 times on your case.
Yes.
Incredible. Well, look, Melanie, thank you very much for sharing your story with me. I'm sure it's a story that a lot of people will be shocked at, angry at, and have a lot of empathy
public
with
awareness, Craig, that don't go near the Court of Session.
Don't go near the Court of Session, aye. But the madness for me is, back in 2010, the direction your lives was taken with your plans for that place. Yeah. And that one phone call one day changed everything.
Ruined your life.
It's gave you 15 years of hell. Both been bankrupted through no fault of your own. And if these people hadn't broke the law and dumped that stuff on your land now, no doubt that project would have been finished, or at least phase 1 would have been done. You might have
you'd be getting on with your life, Craig.
And you know, these things, just when it happens, and that's the bit that gets me. It's just other people, and I think, to sum it up, this is all done through greed.
I think there's more than that, Craig. If you look,
of profit.
I sent you a clipping of a news report that a journalist called Dominic Housechild had done in Advance Construction, and he's highlighted, he didn't know us, but he's highlighted the things that Advance Construction have done and got away with. And the fact they've had 12 final warnings from SEPA. They've polluted other people's land, they've polluted rivers, they have burnt down a listed building, you know, and nothing's happening to them. Why is that, Craig? Yeah. Is somebody from SEPA surely needs to be held accountable? Someone like Kenny Bogue.
Yeah, I used to live in a fantasy world where I just believed this sort of stuff happened in other countries, and I wasn't prepared to believe that it would happen in our country, but unfortunately it is. And there's not a chance, when you've just explained that the journalists already dug up other things that this company have done, but Advanced Construction will not be the only company doing this. Levy Mcrae will not be the only lawyers doing this. The judge at the Court of Session will not be the only person that's doing this. And you think, oh, how bad is it? How many other people out there are getting their lives ruined just by this? Profit by others?
Think there needs to be a public inquiry, and people in the judiciary like yourself or me in walks of life, if you do something wrong, you're held to account. These people should be held to account. Now, there is a video of Lord Caraway misleading or lying to the Scottish Public Petitions Committee.
Oh.
Surely that's not right. He's the head of the Court of Session. Surely he should be held accountable.
Yeah. See your Court of Session, just to finish up here on this, Melanie, your Court of Session hearing, when did that finish? What time scale are we talking about now?
That was 2014, Craig.
Now we're 11 years down the line.
Yes.
Right.
And we've tried to get lawyers, tried to appeal it. And obviously there is a formula that they use that they warn lawyers off.
Because you've also, you told me in other conversations that you've even had difficulty getting lawyers to even talk to you and represent you.
As soon as you mention, Alec Neil's tried to get us lawyers. Twice he's tried. And as soon as the people involved, we're talking about high profile people, as soon as they hear it's the Nolan v Advance case, they run for the hills.
Okay. So where are you now legal? Have you got any legal routes open to you?
Yes, we have now. We have new lawyers, and we're going back to the Court of Session.
Good. And what do you want to do? Are you trying to appeal the decision to reopen the case? What's your
Yes. Well, I mean, we should be, through the nobilium officerdom, get the case quashed. The evidence is stacked against these people, and what they did in that Court of Session, and the manipulation between John Campbell and the other side about not calling witnesses, having a cabinet minister sitting outside. Well, they didn't do that for nothing. They knew if he had gone in that morning, Craig, the case would have been finished.
Yeah. Well, listen, Melanie, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story and time
And I
with
can't
me.
thank you enough, Craig, for listening.
Not a problem, not a problem. It's a privilege. And I just hope Donald's a man that's had many successes through his life on the horse and training the horses, and he's seen a lot of victories. And I just hope and pray that he's got one victory left.
Yes, I hope so. And also, Craig, I hope this, because I feel that this is such importance for other people to see what's happening. And I'll finish off by just one last sentence, Craig. A number of years before this happened, I ended up in a court case with Wimpey Homes Holdings. They took me to court because I was winding a piece of road that I'd asked them permission for and asked them to come and do it, and they wouldn't do it. Anyway, I widened it. So they took me to court. And it was at the same site, the Branchville site, was the road into the site had been overgrown. But I had the right to widen the road because on my disposition, or Donald's disposition, it was 37 feet and it grown into about 7 feet. So we had widened the road and they took me to court. I lost the first session in Hamilton. Obviously, the sheriff had looked. There's Wimpey and there's a wee woman. We'll need to side with Wimpey. So it went to the Sheriff Appeal Court in Airdrie, where the sheriff basically said that the judge in Hamilton had given no regard for the law and overturned the case. So Wimpey were really very unhappy about this. So they said they were going to appeal it to the Court of Session. And that was fine. What we were saying was our authority on that was based on a House of Lords decision, the Alvis v Harris. So it went to the Court of Session, and the day before, Wimpey withdrew, right? So we had actually won, and it, according to the QC at the time, it was going to be a test case. So having a victory like that, we had a meal with the QC, and she said a very strange thing to me. She said, if I had known you and Donald the way I know you now, I would have told you never to go near the Court of Session. It's a very dangerous place. And I was really taken aback. And I thought, you know, what is that? Is it a Samson Goliath thing? You don't go to court if you don't have more money than the other side, if you're 100% right, Craig. So I was really quite annoyed about that. But that was what was said to me. Now I understand what she was warning me about.
Yeah. No, it's frightening, and it's not. I hate injustice. I hate bullies. I hate money being the main driver for some people doing their life, and that's why I was interested in your story, Melanie. So listen, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Craig. Thank you very much.
As I say,
maybe the other
Donald,
people that haven't had the strength to keep going might get some strength from this.
Here's hoping. And you never know, there'll be maybe more people who go, well, that similar thing happened to me and blah, blah, blah.
Yes, exactly, Craig. Well, thank you so much, Craig.
No problem, and I'll speak to you again soon,
Thank you.
no doubt. So there we go, folks. What an incredibly heartbreaking story. And it just goes to show that it's just this desire for pound, shillings and pence that some people have. And they don't care. And where it ends, where the corruption ends, where the backhanders, the brown envelopes and all these things that are evident in our society, where does it all end? How do we finish it? And it's all just about good people doing the right thing and standing up to these people who don't care about corruption and their morals don't allow them to even consider other people. So I hope that Melanie and Donald get the justice that they deserve, and they've lost 15 years of their life fighting this since that horrible day with a phone call. And I just hope that that Donald manages to see this one final victory. So if you want other people to see this video, click the thumbs up, put some comments below and hit share, and share it far and wide, please, for Melanie and Donald. If you've not already subscribe to the channel, please do so, and hit the notifications bell if you want, and YouTube will let you know when I put out new videos. But most importantly of all, unless you're the type of person that ruins people's life just because your own need for greed, then know you. But everyone else, have a great day. Cheerio, bye now.